El mejor consejo que he recibido ha cambiado mi forma de ver las cosas y mi vida. Quiero compartirlo contigo hoy. Esto es mi diario de Inglés Británico con Shandon, profesor nativo de Inglés Británico. Un podcast para hispanohablantes que quieren progresar profesionalmente en el Reino Unido. Vale, empecemos. Welcome to episode 25 of the podcast. We've reached a quarter century of episodes. If you've listened to all of the episodes so far, thanks so much for listening to them all. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. And for everyone else who's listened to some of the episodes, thank you for supporting and listening to the podcast as well. Today, I want to speak about the best piece of advice I've received in my life. I'm going to start by speaking about advice in general. Then I'll tell you who gave me this really great piece of advice. I'll explain why I think it's so good and how you can apply this piece of advice to your own life. So let's get started. We receive tons of advice daily. Every single day, we receive lots of pieces of advice. We receive advice from family, from our parents, for example, or our siblings. We also receive advice from friends and advice from colleagues at work, the people that we work with. And sometimes we receive advice from random people in the street or on public transport, for example. Nowadays, we also receive advice from people very far away from us. Through social media, through podcasts, books, and music. Through all of this different content and all of this different media, TV shows is another way we receive advice. We get so much advice on a daily basis. Everyone has their own opinions. And a lot of the time, everyone gives advice and thinks they should give advice. Sometimes we don't want this advice. Advice we don't ask for is called unsolicited advice. For example, when your mum or your dad gives advice on a topic that you don't want advice on. That is called unsolicited advice. I've received lots of great advice throughout my life. Lots of advice that has helped me to improve my life. To be a better person, for example. To be healthier. To be calmer. And so on. There are so many ways that advice I've received has helped me to improve my life. However, I've also received lots of bad advice. Lots of people give advice based on their own experiences without considering your situation. They believe that because something has helped them, it will definitely help you. But everybody is different. This is especially the case on the internet, where people do things to get views and followers, and they say things to get views and followers in places like Instagram or TikTok and so on. There's so much bad advice out there, so you have to be very careful when considering and when accepting advice. As I said, today I want to share the best piece of advice that I've received in my life. A piece of advice that has helped me a huge amount. I don't know if it will help you. I can't promise that. But I hope you'll find this piece of advice and the story around it interesting. So first of all, who gave me this piece of advice? The person who gave me this piece of advice is one of the people I'm closest to in the world. This person is my granddad. me and my granddad have a very special relationship. Over the years, I've spent lots of time with him, and he's like a father figure to me. Over the years, I've spent weeks staying at his house, and I used to stay at his house every year for at least a week. During those times, we've had lots of deep, meaningful conversations about many different topics, about politics, history, our own family, for example. I love these conversations. Sometimes they last for a couple of hours and we cover a huge amount of different topics in one conversation. But I will always cherish these conversations because they're so meaningful and I feel very connected to my granddad. A few years back, this piece of advice that I'm going to now tell you, he said to me for the first time in one of our conversations. Since then, he's repeated this piece of advice to me many, many times. And it's like his catchphrase now because he says it all the time. I think probably every time I see him, he says this piece of advice. But it's something that changed my perspective and has changed my life. It's a very simple piece of advice, but very profound, very meaningful. It's just 3 words long, but those 3 words contain so much meaning. The great piece of advice that he gave me and continues to give me is everything in moderation. I'll repeat that. Everything in moderation. What does that mean? Everything in moderation is about finding balance in life. It's about not excessively consuming things, but also not having to completely go without those things. I'll explain using an example. The example I'll use are sweets, something I love to eat. Many people think that they have to completely avoid sweets because they think sweets are unhealthy, so I shouldn't eat any sweets at all. But this isn't true. It's true that sweets are unhealthy, of course. Even I admit that. But it's not true that you have to completely avoid them to live a healthy life. In a small amount, that is moderation, sweets aren't a problem. If you just have some sweets, it's not an issue. It's not a problem. Sweets only cause a problem if you eat too many all the time. Then that means they're going to affect your health and will likely make you unhealthy. But having some sweets every now and again isn't a problem. So everything in moderation. I'll give you another example with social media. Spending some time on social media isn't bad. You don't have to completely avoid social media, especially because there is some positive stuff on there and it's a great way to keep in contact with people as well. The issues and the problems only start when you start spending all day, every day on social media apps. In those cases, it becomes excessive. It becomes too much. But just spending a bit of time every day or every week on social media isn't an issue. So everything in moderation. A third example I'll give you is with work ethic. So work ethic is seen as a really positive thing, having a good work ethic. Not working at all is not good. You become lazy and you won't make progress in life if you're not willing to do work. But working too much is also not a good thing. Because if you work too much and you work all the time, you become tired, you suffer from burnout and stress, you can end up neglecting your family, and you can end up ruining your friendships. Because if you're working all the time, you may not give enough time and effort to your friendships. So you have to find a balance somewhere in the middle. That balance will be different for everyone, but balance in life is key. So everything in moderation. I believe this is such a good piece of advice, since it can apply to anything in life, really. There are so many different situations when this piece of advice can help you in life. I'll give you another 3 quick examples. How much coffee you drink, going to the gym, and watching TV. Too much of any of those things is bad, but too little of those things can be negative, or at least will not be positive. So everything in moderation. So as I said, this piece of advice can apply to any area of your life, whether that's your personal life or your professional life. In almost any situation, this piece of advice is relevant, which is why I love it, and I'm very grateful to my granddad for giving me this piece of advice. Hopefully, this piece of advice will help you as much as it's helped me. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Gracias por escuchar mi diario de Inglés Británico. Si vives en el Reino Unido y sientes que tu inglés te está frenando profesionalmente, te invito a hacer una evaluación de fluidez gratuita conmigo. En esta sesión veo cómo hablas inglés ahora, identifico qué te está bloqueando y te explico qué necesitas trabajar para hablar con más claridad y confianza. No es una clase, es un diagnóstico claro de tu inglés hablado. Reserva tu evaluación ahora a través del link en la descripción del episodio. Gracias y nos vemos pronto. Bye.